Tell me a bit about how you got to this Coldsmoking Cookery School.
Well, I used to be in the fire service. I served 30 years in the fire service, retired 5 years ago. And this is something really that started as a hobby. So I used to smoke food and cure meats and all interesting sort of artisan things with food for years. And the traditional route for a lot of retiring fire officers is to actually go into consultancy or into another fire safety job somewhere. And to be honest with you, I did about 4 years of senior fire safety officer, and I can't think of anything drier to take up my time, and I just didn't want to do that. So I was running courses anyway for the last 10 years, but on a very small scale and using other venues. So it really was just, I kind of fell into it, to be honest. I retired from the fire service in May 2014. I used to jog around the area where my cookery school is now, and I just came across the art centre in Milton Keynes and thought that'd be a nice place to run one of my food smoking classes. So I went to go and see them, and they showed me this venue here, which you see behind me. When we got it, it was a completely empty room, and we invested a little bit of money in it. So retired in May 2014. We were in here in September 2014, and we've been here ever since, and we run all sorts of interesting classes to do with meat curing, charcuterie, sausage making. We also have visiting lecturers and tutors who come in and teach other classes. So we've got a lady that does cheese making, jams and preserves. We've got a guy who's, funnily enough, he's a retired pathologist. He comes in and teaches food fermenting. And we got some local chocolate makers who come in here and teach. We've just taken on a new lady who is teaching tea tasting. So she goes through this whole iteration of tasting teas and understanding how and where they come from. So it's all based around artisan food production. So don't expect to come here and learn how to make a 3-course Italian meal or something like that. We deal with process and artisan production, that kind of thing. So when I retired, obviously I had a pension to fall back on, and I was reasonably financially secure, certainly with the house and the mortgage and things like that. They were all paid off. But it is a worry, because you take on premises, you therefore have a commitment to pay some bills, and you know you need to maintain those, and to do that you need to have bookings, and you need a website design, you need people to help you in the business as well. So all those commitments were a little bit daunting to start with, but because I'd been running the courses before I actually retired, some of that was already in place. So the only really big thing, to be fair, was actually hiring the premises and making sure that we could meet the payments for that, and the insurances and all the other things that came along with it. But probably spent about £7,000 or £8,000 setting this up, just to get it to a point where we could run classes. I had that money in the account anyway, so all we've really done is grown the business in terms of our capital expenditure equipment as we've gone on. So we haven't really taken out any loans. We always operate on a no debt basis, so we don't even take 30 days credit from our suppliers. When we buy and we know it's en route, we'll pay them. We do run a small mail order business where we supplement the things that we teach. So for instance, we teach meat curing and charcuterie. Well, everything I use in that process, so things like bacon curing salts, specialist chemicals, we actually sell those through mail order via a sister website called Smoke Dust. The main driver for me is being able to do something that I actually love doing, and retiring in my early 50s, I'm not the sort of person, and I think it is a personal thing, when you've led an active life and you've been driving a business. You know, I was a senior manager in the fire brigade for best part of 15 years. I did spend 15 years of my career either at fire station or riding in charge of fire engines. So I've always had an active career, always worked a part-time job when I had my days off. So, you know, to stop that and at 30 years and then do nothing is actually quite a culture shock, I think, for a lot of people, especially fire officers and people from the emergency services who do retire generally quite early with a reasonably good pension, and the senior officer's pension is pretty good. Then I think to do nothing is a real challenge. It's easier to actually do something, and that's why a lot of fire officers, you see, they go into jobs related usually to what they're doing. So a lot of my colleagues went into either fire safety jobs. They actually got re-employed by other fire authorities working fire safety. And some, what the fire brigade did a few years ago was they outsourced all their training. So we used to do all our own training in-house, and they outsourced all their training to a private company called Babcock's. They're a massive company, and they do training across a wide piece of different businesses in the public sector. And a lot of my colleagues actually went and joined up with Babcock, and they're now delivering training back to firefighters of all ranks throughout the brigade. But I just didn't feel like it was something I wanted to do. One of the big issues for me was living in Milton Keynes, where I do, and working in London is a real challenge when you have to take your car with you. It's not like I could go down and stay down for a long time. I had my car with me, and that meant I was commuting daily when I was on duty. And also I was camping out when I was on 24s because I didn't live in London. A lot of officers, when they work long shifts and work 24 hours, if they live within the London boundary, when they're on 24s, which means they're working a 24-hour shift, and there are some arrangements where we used to do 2 24s together, so we used to do 48 hours back to back, they would go home after 5 o'clock in the evening and then run from home for emergency calls for the out of hours section of the working day. So living outside of London, I had to pay for my accommodation within London. So that was an added expense. So I worked it out that if I retired, taking my pension into account and all my expenses and all the petrol and to and fro from work and the taxable benefit on my lease car, I was about £300 a month worse off actually being retired. When I first joined in the 80s, there were people there who first joined in the 50s and 60s. So they were really old guys, and in those days they didn't wear breathing apparatus. So the reason the pension was geared the way it was geared was because a lot of the firefighters, and they were guys in those days, not so much now, it's changed quite dramatically, but in those days they would retire, you know, going into fires for many years and suffering from respiratory illness. They would not live very long. That's why the career and the pension were pitched over 30 years rather than most traditional pensions, which are pitched over 40 years. So most guys I know who have gone into another career, whether it be fire safety or some training sort of support for fire services in that respect, seem to have a pretty good balance, I think. I do see them from time to time at social events, and unfortunately funerals now and again is probably the main area where I actually catch up with a lot of old colleagues. They seem quite happy. It's a bit of a challenge, isn't it? There's always that fear of retiring, because in years gone by, you could do 30 years and then that was it. You had to retire. Now it's changed and it's based around your own fitness. So I know senior officers that have done 40 years and they're continuing on to work and receiving a salary and not retiring. I fell into this almost by accident. And a lot of my colleagues, when I do meet up with them, who've gone the more traditional route, as I explained earlier, they love what I do. I mean, I've written 2 books about food smoking, meat curing, and it fascinates them a little bit. And I cycle to work, or I walk in on a nice day. We've got a fantastic setting here. It's set in a nice sort of country estate. So and I live about just under a mile away from where I work.